I don't think there are many other sports that have been misunderstood by the general public in such a bad way like river surfing. Even some of my closest friends still think what we do is absolutely insane. The media loves to heat the controversy, accusing us of misconduct and even threatening other lives. My name is Matt and I've been river surfing in Switzerland for more than 17 years now. This is my perspective on river surfing, my answer to critics, but also a critical analysis of the actual dangers in flood river surfing. This is a summary of my experience and the lessons learned, but most importantly, a glimpse into the biggest passion of my life.
Matthias Niederer, der auch River surfen ist. Herr Niederer, wie kommt man auf so eine waghalsige, andere würden vielleicht sagen, dumme Idee?
But let's start at the beginning. How on earth would you even come up with the idea of surfing a flooded river?
Nach 2 Stunden machen 2 Beamte der beiden einen Strich durch die Rechnung.
Freuen sich die Surfer über den hohen Wasserstand im Moment und das, obwohl die Behörden von der Gefahr warnen.
Eine gute Aufnahme.
I was born in South Africa, home to some of the best surf spots in the world. That's where my fascination for surfing must have been sparked. Even though we moved to Switzerland when I was only 6, the desire for surfing never left me. Switzerland is a landlocked country, so my only chance of learning how to surf was limited to a few weeks of family vacation every second year. We had a couple of cheap bodyboards, and that's how I surfed my first waves. It was enough to get me hooked. At some point, I didn't want to wait for the next vacation anymore. I had to find a way to surf in Switzerland. It didn't take long until I found some articles about river surfing in the web. I even found proof that people were already surfing on river waves in Switzerland. Most people just didn't know about it. We lived very close to a river called Thur. So if surfing was possible on these other rivers, why shouldn't it be possible right here, where I lived? And that's when it all began, the search for surfable river waves, right in front of my doorstep. The earliest documents I found of myself exploring river waves on the Thur was from 2005, when I took these shots during a flood. Luckily, I was not alone with my desire of surfing in Switzerland. We were a group of friends who were all overmotivated to score some waves. Our first attempts were absolutely ridiculous. We tried to surf anything that somehow looked like a wave. Once you know about river waves, you start to see them everywhere. But most of the time, they will be too small to surf. So we had to figure out the characteristics of surfable river waves. A river wave is generated when there is an overflow structure and the river carries the right amount of water. The water speeds up over the drop and thereby generates a wave. Like most rivers in Switzerland, the Thur has been straightened for agricultural land reclamation and flood protection. Weirs were constructed to slow down the water. River corrections have a terrible impact on the ecosystem, and as it turned out, didn't prove very effective for flood control either. Furthermore, these weirs can become death traps for inexperienced swimmers and river rafters. But we'll get to that later. Paradoxically, these weirs transform a river into surfing haven during flood levels. Finding drops was easy, but figuring out how much water these spots needed was a long process. We checked the spots at all different water levels, tested, documented, and analyzed the potential risks. What did the riverbed look like with low water levels? Did they yield hidden dangers? Not enough water, and there would be no wave. Too much water, and the wave would become too flat to surf. What did the river look like behind the wave? Because if you fall, the water carries you down the river until you reach the bank. Were there any hydroelectric power plants? Would the river narrow downstream and speed up the current, which can make an exit more difficult? Was it possible to create a surfable river wave with some minor adjustments from our side? I remember the day when we dropped this profile into a small channel. We created our first own river wave. It was too small to surf properly, but we were super excited anyway. However, not everyone was delighted with our creative experiment, and we had to remove the profile again. We quickly realized that surfing on the tour was only possible during flood levels. But with rising water levels, the river would carry too much driftwood, which could damage our boards and also be a risk for us. So we would only surf with dropping water levels, when only a tiny fraction of driftwood was remaining. The Tour is a river with the characteristics of a torrent. There is no lake that balances the outflow volume. Water levels would rise and drop within a few hours after heavy rainfalls. The time frame remaining where a certain wave was at its best, and the risks at a minimum was usually no more than just a few hours. So being at the right place at the right time was not easy. Luckily, on our search, we met other river surfers who already had much more experience than us. They taught us how to predict the water levels. We studied the river systems, their catchment area for rain, and the different measurement stations of rivers. We learned how to add seasonal factors like meltwater or already water-saturated soil into the equation. After a while, we knew exactly where and how much it needed to rain for a specific spot to run smoothly.
It's nothing like I've ever experienced.
The weather forecast helped us to anticipate potential flood levels already a few days in advance, very similar to the regular swell forecast for surfers. But the forecast could be wrong. You would only have certainty when it actually started to rain and the levels from the tributaries started to rise. We knew exactly how long the water would take to get from there to our spots, which was only a few hours. That was not much time, but it was enough to allow us being at the right place at the right time. After a while, some firefighters from regions affected by the tour noticed how accurately we could predict the water levels, because we would always show up with perfect timing. They started consulting us ahead of potential floods, so they could initiate the right measurements. It was ironic because while people on social media were accusing us of putting rescue personnel at risk, we were actually helping the firefighters to take the right measures. Good timing was crucial for us, but that's not enough. You also need to be an experienced surfer. Since flood waves were only running a few times per year, we spent every single minute of our vacation chasing waves abroad. Some of us, including myself, even worked as flight attendants for a couple of years, giving us the opportunity to surf in the ocean on a regular basis.
Never seen a day like this. Finally getting that sun kiss. Good God, it feels like there's nothing missing. Filling my cup with some love in the kitchen. 'Cause I'm so sweet, super sunny, over easy.
You learn a ton of useful things surfing in the ocean that can also be applied in river surfing. Board control, learning how to deal with currents, using them to your benefit instead of fighting them. And maybe most importantly, getting used to being washed and pushed underwater for longer than you would ever feel comfortable. We also learned to keep a cool head in emergency situations, got stung by a stingray, had the dengue fever, got stuck with our cars, and experienced razor-sharp reefs firsthand. At the same time, other surf alternatives slowly gained traction in Switzerland. Wake surfing became one of the first mainstream solutions to surf in Switzerland. Artificial stationary waves followed shortly after. Both presented safe and easy ways to learn surfing in Switzerland. So we took advantage of all these options, as long as our wallet permitted it. A lot of people think that river surfing is more dangerous than surfing in the ocean. But that's not true. The risks are just different. We don't have razor-sharp reefs. We don't have rip currents. We don't have top-to-bottom waves slamming you down onto the reef. We don't have localism. We don't have jellyfish or stingrays. We don't have overcrowded lineups. Most people don't know anything about river surfing, so they react with distrust and fear. The same thing also happened when snowboarding was first introduced.
But the operators of the hills want them off.
They're dangerous because if one of these skateboards or ski boards, whatever they're called, hit a person, they'd break their leg because they're just like a missile. And most of them have no brakes on them.
And they tend to lip you off. You ask them very nicely to leave, that they're endangering the public and possibly themselves.
I think the major problem with the snowboards is that they run into people. You know, they can't see behind them, and when you get skiers and snowboarders together on a run, you're looking for trouble.
River surfing can be dangerous, especially for people without experience. Some of the most obvious seeming risks are harmless, while others could quickly become life-threatening. So which hazards do you need to be aware of, and what are the measures you can take to reduce them? Every single one of us has already puked after a river surf session and experienced the kind of explosive diarrhea of your nightmares. The water we surf in is extremely dirty, and if you know how our sewage treatment plants in Switzerland work, specifically during heavy rains, that should not come as a surprise. It happens that when you fall, you take in a big gulp of water. An obvious seeming danger are whirlpools. We all have been pulled down by them a couple of times. Whirlpools are not really an issue if you know how to deal with them. What we do is we dive out of them at the bottom. You never fight them. The same goes for currents, eddies, and hydraulic jumps. An experienced surfer will even use them to his benefit. There are, however, surf spots in Switzerland where the water behind the wave is very deep. The whirlpools can become much more powerful than the ones we have in the tour. It can happen that your leash being attached to the floating surfboard prevents you from diving deep enough. We have already experienced this ourselves. In this case, you must be able to detach yourself from the leash in order to dive deeper and out of the whirlpool. Another hazard that is mistakenly seen as very dangerous is driftwood.
Aber jetzt sage ich ganz klar der falsche Zeitpunkt zum Wellenreiten. Die Hochwasserexperten empfehlen allgemein zur Zeit nicht auf die Flüsse zu gehen, weil die Strömung durch das viele Wasser viel stärker ist als normal und weil das Hochwasser von den letzten Tagen viel Schwemmholz gebracht hat, das noch immer gefährlich sein können.
One of our main measures to reduce this risk, we only go surfing with dropping water levels, with only a fraction of driftwood remaining. Still, there is some left and sometimes even entire tree trunks. So why wouldn't I consider this as dangerous? For us, riding a surfboard is about the same as skiing or riding a bicycle for other people. We can maneuver our surfboard in any direction, we can accelerate, we can abort the ride. We are not stuck on the wave. So if you can surf, you are able to avoid most of the driftwood, just like bikers in a forest are able to avoid driving into trees. Sometimes, of course, the driftwood is submerged and you don't see it well. That's bad for our surfboards. They get a ding. But it's not really dangerous for us. You hear a little thud, that's it. Sometimes a whole tree comes down the river sidewards, blocking the entire river. What do we do in these cases? We simply board the ride. As soon as we exit the wave, we get carried away by the current with exactly the same speed like the driftwood, and it gets pretty hard for a tree to catch up with us. In all these years, we have never even had a close call with driftwood. But then there are certain risks that most people are unaware of. One of them are fixed ropes in currents, and even our own safety leash. Fixed rope constructions in strong currents can become death traps. A strong current will pull you underwater when you get entangled with a fixed rope. Most people are not aware of that phenomenon. Also because in most rescue missions a lot of ropes are involved. But what people don't know is that rescue swimmers, for example, have a quick release system to detach instantly from a rope when in danger. There are some surf spots where we use ropes to enter the wave. In these cases, we always have a rescue knife with us, so that if something happens, your surf buddies can cut the rope immediately. The surfer should never be anywhere else than at the very end of the rope to avoid getting caught in the leap. Also, only handlebars without trapeze or any other potential entanglement should be used. All these measures reduce the risk of entanglement with ropes to almost zero. Knowing how dangerous ropes in water can be, it seems strange that we would wear a leash. In fact, if your leash gets entangled and is attached to your foot, you will almost certainly drown. This has sadly already happened to river surfers. The problem is, you will hang head downwards in the current, and the current will pull you underwater. In this position, it is impossible to free yourself from the leash because the entire current is pushing against your body and you have no chance of reaching your foot to detach yourself from the leash. We have tested this scenario under safe conditions. No chance. That's why most experienced flood river surfers have enhanced their leash with a predetermined breaking point. When your leash gets stuck, it will rip apart and you're free. Well, wouldn't it be better not using a leash at all? Maybe in regular river surfing so, but not in flood river surfing. Besides being attached to a floating device, the surfboard can also serve as a beacon to locate you in the murky water. If you have a problem in the water that you are unable to solve yourself, your surf buddies can quickly come to your aid. So what we do is attach the leash to our arm instead of the foot. This way we can free ourselves when the leash gets entangled even without a predetermined breaking point. You will hang in the current, also being pulled underwater, but at least head upwards. In this position, the only part facing the current when you try to free yourself is your other arm. And that can be done quite easily. We go through these moves as a drill before every surf session, so we don't even have to think about what to do in case of an emergency. We have had an incident where a guy from our crew dislocated his shoulder when he tried to catch a paddle-in wave. It's nearly impossible to swim with a dislocated shoulder. Thanks to the leash, he was able to pull his surfboard towards him with the other arm. He was now safe from drowning, but still incapable of swimming back to the riverbank. And that's where you are dependent again on your surf buddies. I've mentioned them a few times. This is one of the most important precautions we take to reduce the risk. Never go surfing alone. Just like the buddy system in diving, we have a system where we have each other's back. You are always responsible for the guy in front of you. When he falls or exits the wave, you oversee his situation until you are sure he is out of the danger zone unharmed. Only then you get ready to enter the wave. The guy behind you now is responsible for your safety. He keeps his eyes open for driftwood at spots where you don't have a good overview yourself. He gives you the okay when everything is clear. The moment entering the wave is the most critical in terms of driftwood, because your face is so close to the water surface. So in spots with more driftwood, wearing a helmet is a pretty good idea. Also because there is a certain risk that when you fall uncontrolled, you could hit some driftwood with your head. This has never happened to us, but better safe than sorry. Entering and exiting the river is also critical in terms of leash entanglement. You can easily avoid entanglement entering the wave by holding the leash in your hand. When exiting the river, it is important that you have familiarized yourself with the spot and know the exit points. Since the water is flowing around trees during flood levels, the risk of not only leash entanglement, but getting stuck in general is critical during the exit. Tree branches can act like a strainer. Water can pass through, but you can't. The best option to avoid this is not stressing to the riverbank. If you miss an exit point, just wait for the next good one and stay calm. Stress is your enemy. It doesn't matter if you have to walk back for a long time, still a lot better than not walking back at all. Last but not least, let's talk about weirs.
2 people are dead after kayaking over a deceptive...
Most people know that weirs can be super dangerous. There have been countless fatal incidents all over the world. In 2008, 5 people of the Swiss army died in a tragic river rafting accident involving weirs in the Kambo. Almost every year, there are some incidents in Switzerland, and more than a few of them have been on the tour. Time is critical when someone is drowning. Rescue personnel is drilled not to endanger themselves. That's why rescue attempts from official rescue teams involving weirs can sometimes be quite complicated. Setups can include compressed air harpoons, helicopters, and sometimes up to 30 rescuers. That's why we do not rely on or expect public rescue teams to save us, and certainly not any passers-by. For someone without experience, getting in that water would be extremely dangerous. We are responsible for our own safety, but not for yours. We rely 100% on our buddy system. We are ready on the spot, well equipped and familiar with the environment. After all, there is no one that spent more time in flooded rivers than us. It's our element, it's where we feel at home. In this video, you can see how quickly a kayaker can react and save his friend.
I know this feels like a bad dream. You close your eyes this time, but you see everything. I know you're
Most accidents, including weirs, happen to regular people just wanting to have a fun time on the water. Any experienced river surfer or kayaker would know how to free himself from these situations within a few seconds. Trying to fight currents or whirlpools will end in exhaustion, hypothermia, and in extreme cases, death. But going with the current and exiting it where it slows down, that is like the first thing surf camps around the world teach you. At weirs, you have recirculating currents and whirlpools. Furthermore, the water is filled with air bubbles, so the water almost doesn't carry you. There is only one way of getting out by yourself, although it may be against your natural instincts. You have to take a deep breath and go with the flow, underwater, and dive with the current. Do you understand why people get stuck behind weirs? Well, the sad truth in most cases is because of their floating devices, keeping you in the backflow. If these victims had known how to react, they could have most likely freed themselves. It took us years to figure out the best measures for flood river surfing. Experienced kayakers are without a doubt the most valuable partners rescue teams could have in rivers, and I'm confident enough to put us on the second place experience-wise. I could very well imagine a rescue system that works together with kayakers and river surfers. It is important to note that diving away on the ground with the current does not necessarily work every time. Some weirs have deep scouring holes behind them, sometimes even undercutting the weir itself. If you dive in the wrong direction in these cases, you have a big problem. To stop the scouring behind weirs, the holes sometimes get filled up with boulders. This, however, introduces new hazards like foot entrapment. The position behind weirs is another equally dangerous hazard. A tree that got stuck behind a weir will act like a strainer. While water can pass with ease, a person will be pushed against the branches like a spaghetti noodle in a strainer. Weirs sometimes have iron beams or nasty rebars sticking out of the concrete. If it's already a known surf spot, get informed by someone that knows it. Double weirs are death traps. Stay away from them irrespective of the water level. If you have discovered a new surf spot, scouting the weir at different water levels is an absolute must. There are some waves we found that look perfect from the surface, but turn out to have very dangerous characteristics. We never surf these waves. New deposition can even happen at spots that you already know. Flood river surfing spots need to be checked on a regular basis. So with all these risks, it seems like the stupidest idea on earth to even get close to a weir. But here it comes. Everything changes with different water levels. While you would expect that weirs even get more dangerous with rising levels, at some point the hydraulic jump becomes a smooth, stationary wave. And that is what we are looking for. A stationary wave entails almost no air. The entailed air is what causes the dangerous recirculating current behind weirs, responsible for almost every single accident that has occurred in the past. We know about these dangers, and that's why we avoid them. The problem is, the public doesn't know enough about these dangers. They keep underestimating the hazards of seemingly small overflow structures while at the same time labeling river surfing as extremely dangerous. Some of these waves on the Tour have been surfed for over 20 years now, and there has not been a single rescue incident up to date. The police still shows up regularly at some of our surf spots. Not because they want to, they have to because some pedestrians called them. How on earth would you come up with the idea of calling the police when you see someone surfing on a river? What would you even tell the police? In most cases, the police was friendly and even fascinated by what we were doing. They treated us respectfully and explained why they had to show up. Most of the time, they would just let us continue but made us aware that we ourselves were responsible for our own safety. Sadly, we also have been sent away a few times. Surfing on the Tour is generally not forbidden. The reason stated for sending people away is self-endangerment. An interesting paragraph, since it can basically be applied to total arbitrariness of the individual police member, but does not really fulfill the requirements of proportionality in case of river surfing or kayaking.
Es ist jetzt halt so, was will man machen und jetzt gehen wir einfach weiter auf die nächste Welle.
Surfing on the Tour is not a crime. You do not need to call the police the next time you see us. Between floods and criticism, that's the environment for our biggest passion. We had to learn that not all our friends approved of our passion. We had to accept that from time to time the police would just send us away from surf spots. We had to live with the fact that the media would again and again misrepresent us, with the consequence of thousands of readers being outraged about our seemingly irresponsible behavior. But our passion for the sport remained. There was literally nothing that could have taken away our joy. Today we are facing a very different surfing landscape in Switzerland, offering a range of possibilities. Several artificial waves have already started to operate, and even more projects are on the horizon. The quality of artificial waves has improved massively and comes close to waves you would find in the ocean. Surfing in Switzerland is slowly but surely becoming mainstream. But nothing will ever beat the experience we made in flood surfing. Searching and actually finding waves that had never been surfed before. The excitement that starts to build up in view of torrential rainfalls. Watching the water levels rise and monitoring the rain radar while trying to convince your surf buddies to drop whatever they were doing and get ready. The first glimpse of the chocolate-colored water and an empty wave. Bumpy, stinky, cold, and far from perfect. But it's your wave, just for you. Nothing can beat that feeling.